Dispatches tonight. A question of war crimes. Do some prominent British Muslims have a criminal past? In tonight's Dispatch, the results of a major 9-month investigation that leads from London and Birmingham back to the country where they were born and to the memory of a brutal and bloody war. Tonight's Dispatch presents evidence of crimes committed not in Bosnia or Rwanda, but in Bangladesh. Crimes that can be prosecuted under British law. In this specially extended edition, the story of the Imam in Birmingham, the community leader in East London, and one of those who led the campaign against Salman Rushdie. The questions they must answer in the War Crimes File.
Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh. In December 1971, in the final days of the independence war against Pakistan, the city was gripped by terror. In a series of Gestapo-style raids, intellectuals were rounded up by paramilitary death squads. One victim was Dr. Muhammad Murtaza, an eminent physician. He was tied up, blindfolded, and dragged away.
When he heard his daughter's cries, my husband looked towards us with his blindfolded eyes and raised his hands to say goodbye and got into the bus.
Another stop was at the home of magazine editor Selina Parveen. She was torn from the arms of her 8-year-old son. Sirajuddin Hussain, a respected journalist, was also taken. His wife tried to protest.
I came at them screaming. Then one of them yelled, "Shut up, shut up. If you cry, we will shoot you."
Eventually, the bus arrived at Dolly Chowdhury's house, where her brother-in-law, a professor at Dhaka University, was in hiding.
My servant opened the door. Immediately, they all rushed into the room. We were all screaming and crying out loud. Then they forcibly dragged him off.
Professor Chowdhury was never seen again. Two days later, hundreds of bodies were found dumped in a mass grave here on the outskirts of Dhaka. Among them were Dr. Murtaza and Selina Parveen. She had been horribly mutilated. Many of the corpses had been blindfolded, but their hands tied behind their backs. A young journalist expressed his outrage to the world's media. 24 years later, that same journalist, Inayatullah Khan, revisits the site of the mass graves. He recalls searching for the bodies of his colleagues and friends.
It was a pogrom. It was a pogrom. I mean, it can only be likened to a Nazi-like pogrom. The bodies are mostly very mutilated. In some cases, they're even, the bodies are decapitated bodies, or limbs cut, or decapitated bodies. It's very difficult. It's too terrible to describe it. Very difficult.
Many of these killings were carried out not by the retreating Pakistani soldiers, but by Islamic fundamentalists who collaborated with them.
These were people who were Bengalis, who by absolutely perverted notions of religion sought to justify the worst kind of cruelty, genocide, rape, and the kind of atrocities which we were absolutely horrified to discover had taken place.
It was essentially a political killing done by the fundamentalist party, who not only believed in Pakistan, but also not only collaborated with the Pakistan army in the genocide, but had their own scheme of killing.
Some of those responsible for the killing have lived in Britain for around 20 years and are prominent members of the Bangladeshi community. This man is involved in a network of Islamic groups. He's the vice chairman of the East London Mosque and a trustee of Muslim Aid. This man is the head teacher of a Muslim school and a co-opted member of Tower Hamlets Education Committee. And this man is the imam of a mosque in Birmingham and on the national executive of an Islamic fundamentalist organization. In a 9-month investigation, Dispatches has uncovered evidence that all 3 men were involved in war crimes in Bangladesh. Under the Geneva Conventions, enacted by Parliament, they can be prosecuted in British courts, even though their crimes were committed abroad.
I think the message has to go out that if people commit war crimes, there's nowhere in the world where they can run. There isn't going to be a sanctuary, and they can be prosecuted wherever they are found.
The seeds of the Bangladesh War were sown back in 1947 with the end of the British Raj. As part of the independence deal, Lord Mountbatten presided over the partition of India. Millions of refugees, both Hindus and Muslims, fled their homes. The Muslims flocked to a new nation, Pakistan, which was split in 2, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. The division didn't work. Throughout the 1960s, a nationalist movement, the Awami League, gained popular support in the East. In 1970, under the charismatic leadership of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Awami League won an overall majority in Parliament. But the military rulers refused to give up power.
None of us had envisaged the kind of brutality, the kind of genocidal onslaught that was unleashed on the night of the 25th of March, the 26th of March.
On that night, the Pakistan Army moved into Dhaka. Roadblocks were set up, government buildings were secured, and a curfew was imposed. Here in Old Dhaka, Pakistani troops went on the rampage, murdering indiscriminately.
This picture is my father, this my little brother. He was stabbed once with a bayonet. Just one bayonet stab, nothing else. One bullet in my father's chest.
It was at the University of Dhaka that some of the worst atrocities were committed. At the time, Meghna Guhotakota was 13 years old. Her father, a professor of English, was murdered by Pakistani troops.
This is where the bodies are right now. About 300 people were killed over 2 days of dreadful killing. And the bodies lie here right now.
This rare piece of film was secretly shot during the massacre. In the bottom right-hand corner, a group of Hindu students is herded towards a pile of corpses by Pakistani soldiers. One of the students begs for his life. The soldiers appear to leave, then one comes back. After the military crackdown, volunteers from all over the country formed a liberation army known as the Mukti Bahini. Trained and armed in part by the Indian government, it began an effective guerrilla campaign. But the Pakistani military soon found local Bengali allies. Fundamentalist parties began collaborating with them in the name of Islam. This man, Abu Saeed, was a notorious collaborator. Now a British citizen, he runs a Muslim school in the East End of London. It was in the Bangladeshi community in Whitechapel that Dispatches first heard allegations that Abu Saeed was in a paramilitary death squad, charges he denies.
I challenge everybody for that to find out anything from any record whatsoever, whether here or in Bangladesh.
Dispatches went to the far northeast of Bangladesh. Abu Sa'id was born and raised here in the province of Sylhet. He was educated in this traditional Islamic college. Those who grew up with him remember him well.
Abu Sa'id was a good student because he memorized the whole of the Holy Quran in just 21 days, 3 weeks. Only a very bright student could do such a massive task. From the very beginning, Abu Sa'id was involved with the Islami Chhatra Sangha, the student branch of Jamaat-e-Islami.
Jamaat-e-Islami was then, and is today, an extreme group of Muslim fundamentalists. Unlike the Awami League, which stood for a secular, independent Bangladesh, the Jamaat wanted to remain part of the Islamic State of Pakistan and was violently opposed to the independence movement. In 1971, this man, Lutfur Rahman, was second in command of the Jamaat in Sylhet district. Dr. Faisal Haq practices in the small town of Kanai Ghat. He remembers how a month after the war began, Abu Sa'id and Lutfur Rahman addressed a crowd of 500 Jamaatis. They issued a fatwa, a religious edict, sanctioning the murder of their political opponents.
The fatwa was issued by Maulana Abu Sa'id. It said that people who joined the war or who were Awami Leaguers were kafirs, non-believers. People who captured them or who died capturing them would become martyrs, and if they lived, they would become heroes. Hafiz Lutfur Rahman was at the meeting. He also supported it.
Dr. Haq heard about the fatwa from many different sources. Only one of the eyewitnesses was prepared to talk about it openly.
I was going to Kanai Ghat Bazaar. On the right side of the road was the religious school, Mansuria Madrasa. They were having a meeting there. They were making speeches over the loudspeaker. I heard their announcements over the mic. I heard Abu Sa'id's name announced over the mic. After the fatwa, all the mass killings began.
Dr. Haq was well known as a supporter of the independence movement.
3 of us, my nephew Ahmad Hussain, Jalal and myself, were captured one night and taken to the dark bungalow. And we were beaten from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. They broke the stool. I needed treatment where the skin was peeled off my back. Even my nails fell off.
Do you think that your torture was caused by the fatwa?
It was caused by the fatwa. This action followed the fatwa.
Soon after, Lutfur Rahman was one of the signatories of this leaflet distributed around Sylhet.
We must eliminate people who are traitors, miscreants, separatists and rumor mongers.
Within a few days, local Jamaat leaders held a meeting here on this school field in nearby Charkai. According to Mufiquddin, Lutfur Rahman was one of the main speakers.
They made a list of freedom fighters and active leaders of the Awami League. The purpose of this was to burn the houses, to catch those who supported the Awami League and the freedom fighters.
How do you know about the meeting?
I was there. I was in Charkhay. There were many people. About 1,000 attended the meeting. The organizers were Lutfur Rahman, Manzoor Hafiz and Shamsul Haq. These three organized it. It was Lutfur Rahman who drew up the list.
The next day, Lutfur Rahman returned to Charkhay, leading a mob of 500 Jamaat supporters. They were shouting slogans and marching to the house of an old man, a spiritual leader named Yazmir Dafadar, whose family were prominent members of the Awami League. As the mob marched towards the family compound, his cousin Aklas Ali was forced to join them.
I did as I was told. I was frightened. I went along with all the people. We came this way with them. There were thousands of people shouting slogans as they followed. They walked along this road.
As the mob approached, Dafadar came out to greet them.
As soon as he came out in front of them, they got hold of him. They beat him with a stick. They told me to beat him with a stick. I said I couldn't. In the name of God, I said I couldn't. Manzoor Hafiz hit him. He fell and started reciting the Quran. Then those Kafirs insisted. He was saying, victory to Bangladesh. They wanted the Pakistanis to hear them. They claimed he said, joy Bangla, victory to Bangladesh.
Who said joy Bangla?
Lutfur Rahman said this.
By claiming that the old man had been chanting nationalist slogans, Lutfur Rahman incited the crowd to further violence.
They dragged him from here to there, you see. Then they began to beat him and stone him, you see. After that, the three of them kept him there for a few moments, and then they dragged him along this road, the three of them. Lutfur Rahman, Manzoor Hafiz, Shamsul Islam, then threw him into the pond.
After the murder, the family compound was looted and set on fire. Lutfur Rahman and two others broke into the old man's house. His widow was beaten up and thrown out of her home. It was the start of a slaughter of innocent civilians that spread across the entire region. Today, Lutfur Rahman is a British citizen and lives in Birmingham. He's the imam of this mosque in the Bordsley Green Islamic Centre. He failed to respond to repeated requests to answer the allegations made in this programme. Dispatches tracked him down at his home to give him one last opportunity.
I'm from Channel 4 Television, Dispatches. Yeah. I'd like to ask you some questions about your wartime activities in 1971. We have evidence that you were involved in war crimes during 1971.
No, I was not there.
Specifically, we have evidence that you were involved in the stoning of Yazmir Dafadar in Charkhay. We also have evidence that you were involved in a fatwa. Sir, these are serious allegations. Can we please talk to you about them?
It was from these border areas with India that the Bangladesh Liberation Army, the Mukti Bahini, launched its military campaign. By May 1971, the Mukti Bahini were making their presence felt. If the Pakistanis were to win the guerrilla war, they would need more help from local collaborators. In July, the leadership of the Jamaat held a secret meeting here in Dhaka. Lutfur Rahman represented the Sylhet district. The meeting's purpose was to form a paramilitary death squad called the Al-Badr to help the Pakistani military.
Pakistan had come about because of Islam, so this country had to be defended for Islam. So we will fight to the death as Mujahideen. We have to do this as an Islamic jihad. That is why we have taken the name Al-Badr. The jihad must be carried out through the Al-Badr.
While in Sylhet, dispatches obtained evidence from a collaborator who has detailed inside information of the Jamaat leadership during the war. Fearing reprisals if he spoke out, he asked to remain anonymous. He says Abu Saeed was recruited as a senior commander of the Al-Badr in Sylhet.
Abu Saeed was a bit of a vicious person, stubborn, a furious type. Officially, Farid Chaudhry was number one, and Abu Saeed was number two. But in practical terms, Abu Saeed was more effective. In execution, Abu Saeed was better. He was superior.
Shabir Jalalabadi vividly recalls meeting Abu Saeed in Sylhet town. During the war, he was working underground for the independence movement. One day he was arrested and taken to the Al-Badr headquarters for questioning.
After entering, Abu Saeed asked me the first question. He asked, "Where were you going?" He questioned me in a very aggressive manner. I said that I have a house here and I have come here to find out what condition it is in. He didn't really believe me. Perhaps it was because he didn't believe me, or perhaps it was to get me to confess that he hit me hard with all his force.
Shabir was only 16 at the time, and he managed to convince Abu Saeed of his innocence.
He gave me a warning. If I ever catch you supporting the liberation war or opposing Pakistan, I will kill you immediately, without hesitation.
Abu Saeed maintains he remained in the Sylhet district throughout the war. But according to the anonymous witness, in August 1971, the Al-Badr sent Abu Saeed to Dhaka for training in both military and intelligence gathering techniques.
He went to Dhaka and received advanced training. He could even operate a light machine gun and similar weapons. There was another training on how to make lists of those who were anti-Pakistan, those against Pakistan.
Al-Badr training took place here at this government-run physical training center in Dhaka. During the war, it became notorious as a center for torture and killing. The caretaker witnessed the horror that took place here. Rahman Ali.
There would be training twice a day. After the training, they would kill a few people themselves and cut them up and dump them. And then they would shoot some in Raya Bazar and dump them too. Those still breathing would be shot.
Raya Bazar was a swamp near the torture center, which was used as a mass grave. Victims were taken there to be killed. Delwar Hussain is one of the very few survivors of the death camp. 24 years ago, he was taken to Raya Bazar with hundreds of other prisoners for execution. When the Al-Badr started shooting, he dropped to the ground as if dead. He gave dispatches first-hand evidence of the Al-Badr's torture techniques.
The skin and the scalp were cut, and they put out some people's eyes, and the teeth in people's mouths were smashed. The skin was all, and the entire floor was covered in blood.
According to the anonymous source, after completing Al-Badr training, Abu Saeed returned home to Sylhet. He then worked alongside Lutfur Rahman in organizing the preparation of hit lists of suspected nationalists. Their role in this was confirmed by a cleric who has first-hand knowledge of their activities during the war. He too fears reprisals from Islamic fundamentalists, so Dispatches has concealed his identity and revoiced his evidence.
Abu Saeed and Lutfur Rahman regularly held secret meetings with Jamaat leaders who had drawn up killing lists of so-called miscreants. They had the power to alter these lists. The names were then given to the Pakistan Army, who with the help of local collaborators would execute them.
As well as organizing killing lists, the Jamaat and the Al-Badr were also involved in mass rape and abducting women for Pakistani soldiers. In September 1971, the Al-Badr and the Pakistan troops raided this tea plantation in Sylhet.
The ones who were there, they were taken, women were raped. They didn't spare anyone. Hindu, Muslim, tea plantation laborers, upper-class women, maids, whoever they came across, they tortured and raped. We even heard that they raped the women in front of their fathers.
Saida Jibanessa worked with rape victims after the war. She discovered that the rapes were systematic and organized by the Jamaat and Al-Badr.
The collaborators helped the Pakistanis. They took the sisters when they couldn't find the freedom fighters. They procured thousands of women and girls who were tortured, taken away and raped.
After liberation, rape victims were filmed at this welfare center. Hindu women told how they were deliberately made pregnant to force them to have a Muslim child. Many of them had abortions. Some committed suicide. As the effective commander of the Al-Badr in Sylhet, Abu Saeed must have been aware that his men were involved in widespread rape and the preparation of killing lists.
Abu Saeed?
He declined several invitations to take part in this program, so Dispatches approached him in the street to put the allegations to him.
We have evidence that you were involved in war crimes in 1971. What do you have to say about that?
These are all news to me.
We have evidence that you are a senior leader of the Al-Badr, a Gestapo-like organization. Under your leadership of the Al-Badr was involved in rape of women and the procuring of women for the Pakistan Army.
No.
And you were involved in preparing lists of your political opponents, which were then given to the Pakistan Army for their action.
I challenge all this.
You refute all these allegations?
Yes, I refute all this.
Used to work closely with another war criminal resident in Britain. Chowdhury Moinuddin is one of the men who controls the East London Mosque, one of the biggest mosques in the country. In 1989, Moinuddin was one of the leaders of the campaign which preceded the fatwa on Salman Rushdie. To many in the Muslim community, he's a respected figure. But Dispatches has found that during the Independence War, he was a leading commander of the Al-Badr and one of those responsible for organizing the systematic slaughter of Dhaka's intelligentsia.
Chowdhury Moinuddin is not a symbol of killing. He is in fact a participant in the killing. He is in fact a mastermind behind the killing. I think that he should be treated as a war criminal.
In 1971, Moinuddin worked here at the Purbadesh newspaper in Dhaka. His superior was Atikur Rahman. He recalls how Moinuddin's inside knowledge of the Al-Badr gave the paper an exclusive story which scooped its rivals.
Chowdhury Moinuddin disclosed the news first that a Bahini or a force has been established named Al-Badr. That was the disclosure made in Purbadesh only, throughout Pakistan. No newspaper in Pakistan could cover that, and that was his disclosure he made in Purbadesh.
Moinuddin knew about the formation of the Al-Badr because he was in fact on its central committee. His journalist colleagues in Dhaka were still unaware of this, but back in his hometown in Feni, Moinuddin was already known as a man to avoid. Feni is a 3-hour drive southeast of Dhaka. This is Chowdhury Moinuddin's family home in a small village just outside the town. As in Sylhet, the Al-Badr in Feni was a paramilitary group of extreme fundamentalists who drew up hit lists for the Pakistani military.
Chowdhury Moinuddin came to Feni several times. His main activities were how to keep Feni out of the hands of the freedom fighters and how to brutally murder them, how to wipe them out along with their families.
During the war, Professor Abedin was a commander of the Bangladesh Liberation Forces. Part of his duties involved gathering intelligence about Al-Badr atrocities.
We had informers from whom we received information. We got news about when Chowdhury Moinuddin came and even how he moved around with Ilyas, the commander.
Another former independence fighter, Gasuddin Nanu, confirms that Moinuddin was the most wanted man in Feni.
We received a list from the Liberation War High Command of 10 to 12 war criminals in Feni, individuals who were anti-liberation. If possible, we were to arrest them. If that were not feasible, to kill them wherever they were found. Chowdhury Moinuddin's name was number 1 on that list.
Feni College, where Moinuddin had studied, was a death camp run by the Al-Badr. Immediately after liberation, Professor Abedin went to the camp to see if there were any survivors.
In the college grounds and the fields, you could see many people's hair, their heads, their hands. The bodies of countless people had been buried there, just killed.
They would bring people who were suspected of being involved in the Liberation War. People were tortured in inhuman ways. Many were murdered, many crippled for life, many blinded. Many of them had their hands and feet cut off.
All operations here were carried out under orders from the central headquarters, and the central leaders were Chowdhury Moinuddin and others.
It is unclear whether Chowdhury Moinuddin actually went out on pickups in Feni, but in Dhaka, eyewitnesses identified him as leading Al-Badr abductions of intellectuals. December the 3rd, 1971, was the beginning of the end for the Pakistanis. Divisions of the Indian Army rolled into the country in support of the Bangladesh Liberation Forces. But the scenes of jubilation at the liberation of Dhaka were short-lived. Almost immediately, the scale of the slaughter became clear. Dulu Rahman remembers a journey he took 24 years ago looking for his brother, who disappeared in the early hours of the morning a few days before liberation. One of the places he came to search was the site of a mass killing field where the Pakistani army and the Al-Badr dumped their victims' bodies. Now, a monument to the dead. Dulu remembers the dreadful sights that greeted him that day.
I searched extensively, and I mean, what can I tell you? There were endless corpses there. And those corpses had rotted, putrefied. It was so bad that we covered our faces and noses with scarves, leaving just our eyes showing. The stench was unbearable. Yet, in the midst of that, I searched for my brother's body. Not just I, but everyone searched for their loved ones. I looked for the body of my older brother, A.N.M. Mustafa. But I gave up. I couldn't find it.
Mustafa was a journalist who worked alongside Chowdhury Moinuddin. A couple of weeks before his disappearance, an incident had taken place in the newsroom.
Both of them had an altercation, you can say. Ghulam Mustafa was critical of Jamaat's role, which Chowdhury Moinuddin did not like. That's why he started abusing Ghulam Mustafa, and finally he threatened with dire consequences.
In the early hours of the morning on December the 11th, Ghulam Mustafa was taken from his house by a group of armed Al-Badr. The next morning, his brother went to the newspaper office to ask for help.
I told them that my older brother had been taken away. They were completely stunned. I noticed there was an uneasy atmosphere, and immediately Chowdhury Moinuddin was sent for. Chowdhury Moinuddin arrived and he was told, look, they've taken Mustafa away. Try, please try to find out anything about where he is.
Chowdhury Moinuddin took Dulu around the Pakistani and Al-Badr bases in Dhaka, including the notorious physical training center in the north of the city. In 1971, these bases were heavily guarded, with access restricted to military and Al-Badr personnel.
Did Chowdhury Moinuddin have difficulty in gaining entry to the Al-Badr offices?
No, that's not what I saw. I saw him enter easily, very easily. And particularly when he went to the physical training center, it was as if the guards were standing to attention. And he went straight inside. He didn't face any obstacles anywhere.
Dulu's brother, Ghulam Mustafa, was never seen again. On the night he disappeared, other journalists were targeted by the Al-Badr. One was Inayatullah Khan. Luckily for him, he'd gone into hiding.
I came to know later that they bit up a particular person whom they thought to be me. And one of the tenants upstairs, he heard the noise, he heard the sound, he heard the shouts that, "Are you Inayatullah?" And he was denying all the time. And he was very badly beaten up.
Another journalist in fear of the Al-Badr was Ataus Samad.
In Bangladesh, the Attorney General of the country has opposed...
Ataus Samad has recently retired as the BBC correspondent in Dhaka. He too had gone into hiding to avoid arrest. And that night, he was staying next door to a fellow journalist, Najmul Haq.
Ataus Samad. Thank you, London. I heard a voice shouting, "Save me, please save me." And then another voice ordering him to be quiet. I thought it was Najmul's voice, but I wasn't very still very sure. I was perhaps trying to delude myself, thinking that it is not Najmul.
Najmul Haq was never seen again. He was married with young children. On the same night, the Al-Badr had also tried to take Ataus Samad. Mushtaq, a tenant in his house, was interrogated.
I opened the door and saw uniforms. Their clothes were military. Someone held a Sten gun to my chest. Two people on two sides picked up their rifles. There was a man standing in ordinary clothes, in civilian dress. A muffler was wrapped around his head. He asked, "Where is Ataus Samad?"
Mushtaq was being dragged out to the Al-Badr bus when he suggested they should ask a neighbor, Mahmudur Rahman.
They asked, "Where is Ataus Samad?" "I don't know. They've locked everything up and gone off somewhere. How am I supposed to know?"
The Al-Badr then went to the home of another journalist, Sirajuddin Hussain.
What's your name? My husband said Sirajuddin Hussain. Where do you work? He answered, Ittifaq. There was this man. He had a muffler around his neck. He was wearing a sweater and he had big bulging eyes. Then one of them rolled his eyes at the two others and he signaled that it was this man.
Hussain was dragged from his home and never seen again. Atikur Rahman was another journalist targeted by the Al-Badr. Some days before his newspaper colleagues disappeared, Moinuddin had asked for his address.
He asked the number of my residence. Immediately it cropped in my mind I should not give him the actual number of my residence, because of that fear that he has already become involved in Al-Badr politics.
After the war, an Al-Badr hit list of journalists was found, including Atikur Rahman's name and the false address he'd given to Moinuddin.
I gave that address to only Chaudhry Moinuddin. And when that address appeared in the Al-Badr list, that is obvious that he has given this address to Al-Badr. It makes clear that he was involved in Al-Badr killings.
Are you sure that you didn't give that address to anybody else?
Sure. I remember very well that I never gave that address to anyone else except Chaudhry Moinuddin.
After the end of the war, Atikur Rahman wrote a story that made front-page news across Bangladesh, naming Chaudhry Moinuddin as a member of the Al-Badr.
After seeing that picture, I was able to identify him and think that he is Mr. Moinuddin.
How can you be so sure?
His features, his coloring. After all, I had met him personally. Later, when his picture came out in the newspapers, I was able to recognize him, that he is the man.
Are you sure that the picture you saw in the newspaper was the same man that led the Al-Badr to Ataus Samad's house?
I'm sure about this.
How can you be so certain? It was dark.
The light didn't fall inside my house because of the blackout. When they came in, I'd put the light on in the room. So when I was talking to him, we were in the light. I could recognize him clearly.
So you saw this man's face very clearly?
Very clearly.
Other eyewitnesses had seen Moinuddin when the Al-Badr abducted intellectuals. 2 days before liberation, he was identified during the pickup of Professor Mufazzal Haider Chowdhury. Dolly Chowdhury remembers what happened.
I saw 3 or 4 men standing with scarves over their faces. They were armed with guns.
One of the Al-Badr commanders told the family not to worry, as he was one of the professor's former students.
Immediately my husband tried to whip off his scarf. He quickly pulled it up very fast. It was a matter of a second.
Can you tell me whether you identified any of the men that came to the house?
I was able to identify one. Moinuddin.
How did you identify him?
When he was a student, he often used to go to my brother-in-law's house. My husband, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, we all recognize that man.
Professor Chowdhury was taken to the Al-Badr torture center. Delwar Hussain heard him being tortured in the next room.
Even in the darkness, I was able to recognize him. He was asked various questions and he gave his name. He said, "My name is Mufazzal Haidar Chowdhury." Right after that, they started beating him with an iron rod. After beating him in various places, his eyes, his face and his hands, he was tortured and he screamed.
The professor was one of hundreds of intellectuals murdered by the Al-Badr in the dying days of the war. Academics, doctors and journalists were all targeted. After the war, Professor Ani Susaman was on a commission of inquiry which wrote the official history of the conflict. He is convinced that the murder of the intellectuals was part of a calculated policy.
I think when the Al-Badr went to abduct people and kill them in December 1971, they had already realized that there was no way to stop the creation of Bangladesh. So they wanted to do as much harm as possible to Bangladesh. And one of the ways of doing it was to kill as many intellectuals as possible.
On December the 16th, 1971, the Pakistanis surrendered to the Indian Army and the nation of Bangladesh was born. Freed from a Pakistani jail, Sheikh Mujib returned to Dhaka in triumph on January the 10th, 1972. That same day, he pledged that war criminals and collaborators would be brought to trial.
I would like to assure our people that those who are responsible for committing atrocities and for the collaboration will not go unpunished. I would therefore appeal to all concerned to remain patient while the due process of law takes its course.
Some people took the law into their own hands. In the immediate aftermath of the war, there were revenge killings of collaborators. Many were taken into protective custody, but even then, they weren't always safe. Atikur Rahman intervened when a member of the Jamaat, Khalek Majumdar, was being tortured.
I asked the freedom fighters who were there not to torture him anymore, but to hand him over to police. And then he disclosed that he was not involved in killing, but Chaudhry Moinuddin was the operation in charge of Al-Badr in Dhaka city.
Although Majumdar was found guilty of abducting a senior journalist, his conviction was later overturned on appeal. But despite the circumstances of his detention, Atikur Rahman remains convinced that the evidence Majumdar gave about Moinuddin is reliable.
He always claimed that Chaudhry Moinuddin was the operation in charge of Al-Badr in Dhaka city. Then I asked him whether he can give a written statement. He agreed. He said, yes, why not? I'm not afraid. I can give it because I know it very well.
Named as Operation in Charge of the Al-Badr, Moinuddin became a key target for the new government. Professor Abedin was ordered by Sheikh Mujib's nephew to go to Dhaka and find him.
We went to different parts of Dhaka city to carry out our mission. Chaudhry Moinuddin could not be found, and we discovered either the Pakistan army or the collaborators had helped him to escape from Bangladesh.
By 1973, Moinuddin was living in Britain. He made no attempt to hide his identity, and despite his past, the Home Office granted him British citizenship. He declined to be interviewed, but gave dispatches a written statement.
I was never a member of the Al-Badr or involved otherwise in its activities. All the accusations being made against me are therefore utterly false and malicious, and either politically motivated or instigated otherwise.
Moinuddin insists that he has never been charged with any offence. He claims that all war crimes committed in Bangladesh were thoroughly investigated by the authorities. But this is not true. Although Sheikh Mujib's government banned the Jamaat, it only prosecuted some war criminals before granting an amnesty to political collaborators. Following his assassination in 1975, the country was in effect under military rule for 15 years. The pursuit of war criminals was suppressed as an issue. In 1977, the Jamaat was legalized. It denies its role in war crimes and today is a growing force in Bangladesh politics, with 20 MPs, some of whom are themselves alleged to be war criminals.
No justice has taken place. It's a tragedy of our times that the main political force behind that has come back and legitimized itself in the mainstream politics of this country. I don't think that's their success. I think that's our national failure.
Because of the political situation in Bangladesh, it's unlikely that war criminals will be prosecuted there. But the families of the victims still want the murderers of their loved ones brought to justice.
I can only demand their punishment since I was hurt. My husband, well, I lost him. I want punishment. This I want from my heart.
My son was 9 months old then. My daughter was 3.5. I had to bring them up alone. They have a great anger and accusation in their minds, a sense of injustice. Why is there no trial? Can no one try this matter?
The British government can. Under the 1957 Geneva Conventions Act, it could bring Bangladeshi war criminals resident in Britain to trial.
It seems to me that the whole purpose of passing the Act of 1957, the Geneva Conventions Act, was precisely so that people against whom allegations of this kind are made, who are found to be in this country, can be investigated. If that doesn't happen, then it seems to me it would be a waste of time passing the Act.
There is such a law in Britain which allows the government to arrest, prosecute and try someone involved in war crimes. I would like the British government to go ahead with that procedure.
War criminals, people who commit these grave crimes and crimes against humanity, no matter where they are, should be prosecuted. And I believe, in fact, now there is British legislation recognizing this obligation to proceed against such criminals wherever they may be found. And I hope that they would discharge this obligation.
In Scotland Yard, there's a special unit investigating alleged Nazi war criminals living in Britain. Similar investigations could be mounted against Lutfur Rahman, Chowdhury Moinuddin and Abu Saeed.
I would like to see the evidence gathered together, the investigation completed, and the results put before the prosecuting authorities so that they can decide whether there is sufficient evidence in each particular case. There are some kinds of offences which are so horrifying that anywhere in the world, and whoever commits them, we can't wash our hands of them and pretend it doesn't concern us.
Dispatches has passed the details of this investigation to the Attorney General's Office, the All-Party Committee on War Crimes, the Home Office, and Scotland Yard's War Crimes Unit.